we are joined now by a guy whose question was viewed 30 million times roughly on Twitter alone on Saturday. He is a writer at OutKick. He is Dan Zaksheske. I believe I have pronounced his last name correctly because I'm the worst at pronunciations on the planet. Dan, first, did you expect for the answer and the question to go as viral as it has? And for those of you who did not hear it, Dawn Staley, University of South Carolina women's basketball coach, said she would be okay with men identifying as women playing women's basketball. It has been much discussed. It has echoed throughout everywhere over the past 48 hours or so. Did you expect it to be as big of a story as it was? And what has the reaction been like from your perspective?
So you never expect to get, as you said, 30 million views on a video. However, at the moment she said it, I knew I had a story. There was no question about that. In fact, I ended up looking up later and even beforehand to see if Dawn Staley had ever talked about this issue before, because it seems like something that the media would ask her. I think her answer actually surprised them, and that's why they've never asked her. I believe that the women's basketball media, which, by the way, is mostly just PR at this point, I think they thought, based on her religious views, that she was going to not say that, so they've never asked her. Because as long as they didn't ask her the question and force her to say what went against their ideology, then they wouldn't have to report on it. So I actually think it really shocked them as much as it shocked me to hear her say that.
Yeah, thanks for being with us. And it obviously got a ton of attention over the weekend because I honestly was surprised that she answered it. I would have assumed that she would have taken the easy route, which is to defer and say, I'm just, I'm not a coach, but I can play this game too, right? Like I'm just focused on, whether my girls are going to win the big game or something, right? End of story. Why do you think she leaned into it?
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on that a few times. I'm surprised as well. I mean, a lot of people attacking me for asking the question and basically saying that I made this a story when I did not make this a story. Dawn Staley made this a story with her answer. As you said, I asked the Iowa coach 2 hours later. I had a lot of people in my mention saying that too, like, oh, I guess you didn't ask the white coach about this. Well, just so everybody knows how this works, Dawn Staley's press conference her availability was before Lisa Bluder's, which came 2 hours later, and I had planned to ask both coaches. That's just how it went. Lisa Bluder did, Buck, do what you're talking about. She said, it's an important issue. It's an issue for another time. Right now, I'm just focused on, the national championship. Part of me wonders if I built a little bit of a relationship with Dawn Staley last week, asking her about Easter Sunday. Her South Carolina team won their Elite Eight game against Oregon State on Easter Sunday. And I asked her about whether or not that carried any additional importance for her. Now, as we've talked about, the women's college basketball media, as you can imagine, pretty hard left-leaning group. They aren't big fans of Dawn Staley talking about God, talking about religion. They don't ask her about it, ever. They never ask her about it. In fact, any article that you look up with her talking about it, the occasional one you'll see is, she shouldn't be allowed to pray with her players, that she's, somehow attacking their religious freedom and all that. So I think asking her the week before about her religion and writing about it, because to me that was an interesting story. Dawn Staley on Easter Sunday, she talks about God all the time. Why would I not ask her about that?
We're talking to Dan Zaksheske. He did a great job asking a question that actually got an answer and impacted people. So I'm going to ask you to go into Dawn Staley's mindset here a little bit. Obviously, you're not an expert on her thought process. But I found what was so interesting about this is she paused before she answered. I'm sure she's thought about it before. But in the past, she's talked about her team gets better by practicing against basically intramural level basketball players on the University of South Carolina's campus. Those are men who are brought in to scrimmage against her girls. So she's aware of the biological difference here. So this is not a situation where she's just making a political argument and she's not really that cognizant of actually how much difference there is. She played college basketball. She scrimmaged against men her whole life. She knows the difference. Why do you think she answered the way that she did, knowing that she is well aware men are bigger, stronger, faster, better, by far, basketball players than women?
Yeah, and Clay, they call them the Markers. That's the name of their sort of men's team that they practice
And
against.
she's been, and I'm correct, right? She's been super complimentary of those guys and how much better they make the women.
Yeah, I think after the Sweet 16 win, she even brought them up. That someone asked, "What's been the key to your success?" And she said, "Practicing against our markers, the highlighters, the markers, the men. Because no matter what we do, no matter what women's team we face, they're faster, they're quicker, they pass the ball faster. Like, yes, she has talked very openly that practicing against the men has made her team better because no women's team she's ever going to face or the South Carolina's ever going to face is going to be as good as these guys who I heard you mention earlier in the show are not South Carolina's men's basketball team. These are just guys on campus who play basketball and, probably scored 13 points a game in high school in South Carolina. Here's what I think. And as you said, I preface this, of course, by saying I don't know what Dawn Staley was thinking. I don't know if she's lying. I think that the issue doesn't affect her, and I think she doesn't think it's going to. I think she sees this as, like some people have pointed out, like, oh, this is a fringe issue. It's not a big deal. There are a couple of transgender athletes. Obviously we're familiar with the Leah Thomas story, but it hasn't really taken college basketball yet. And my point of asking the question, with all these people coming at me and saying this wasn't the time and place, how could you possibly do this, the day before a national championship game? Are you kidding? This is exactly the time and place. This was the biggest weekend in arguably in American women's sports history, based on how many people were watching, how the spotlight was on women's sports. What better time to talk about an issue facing women's sports than now? I honestly think, as you guys have mentioned, she is a left-wing media darling. They love everything about her except the God stuff. They love that she talks about racism. And I think she didn't want to go afoul of them on an issue that really right now doesn't affect her. But it will. Don't get it twisted. It's going to affect her. It just doesn't right now. So I think she felt kind of safe taking the route of, I'm going to stay on the good side here.
Dan Zaksheske of OutKick. Dan, where can people go to?
You can just say Dan Z, guys. I totally get it, understand, but you're doing a great job.
I was leaning into it there. I thought I almost stuck the landing. I just kind of got a little unsure at the end. But OutKick.com for more of your work, I assume, yes?
Yes, OutKick.com. You can follow me on X at Real Dan Zach as well.
Real Dan Zach, or Dan Zaksheske. There we go. Dan, thank you so much, man. Great to have you, and congrats on the big moment over the weekend. Doing journalism, it's a crazy thing, doing journalism sometimes.
It's amazing the number of quote-unquote reporters who have attacked me for reporting. But thank you, guys.
No, you're not supposed to report as a reporter, as you know. It's all propaganda. But thank you for actually doing your job. Appreciate it. We'll take some of your calls, some of your VIP emails here to close us out. And, Civil War is the name of a new movie coming to theaters this Friday. It's a compelling, on-the-edge-of-your-seat, epic thriller from visionary filmmaker Alex Garland. For those who binge watch The Last of Us, you're going to like the storyline. You're going to want to see this one in theaters, though. It is made for the big screen. The movie portrays a dystopian future America and a team of military-embedded journalists racing against time to reach Washington, D.C. before rebel factions descend upon the White House. It's getting great advance reviews from a variety of publications and movie reviewers, and the Rotten Tomato rating is 92% right now. It's produced by A24, written and directed by Alex Garland. You can buy tickets in advance for this theater experience, including select IMAX theater screens. The cast includes Kirsten Dunst, Jesse Plemons, Wagner Moura, Nick Offerman, who I believe was Ron Swanson in the Parks and Rec. So Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec. That's Nick Offerman.
For sure.
Yeah, it's a great character. The movie is Civil War. Again, that's Civil War. Look it up. Make plans to see it in theaters this Friday.